Hey everyone. Before we jump into this episode, I need to give a quick update and provide a disclaimer. This episode was recorded back in early August of 2025 with my good friend and missionary Desi Lugo. In this episode, we discuss various topics regarding navigating through suffering and faith crisis. And this conversation became very personal because Desi's wife, Rachel Lugo, had been suffering tremendously with various health ailments that became so severe she could no longer travel with Desi and their kids during their deputation journey. Now, at the time we recorded this, it was not clear what specific diagnosis Rachel was suffering from, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, made things even harder for the Lugos. However, in the months since we recorded this episode, there have been a few positive updates, and I'm going to read a statement Desi provided for me to read to you all. After recording this podcast with Nathan in late August 2025, Rachel was diagnosed with neuropathic POTS, which stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. The cause of POTS is unknown, and medically speaking, there is no cure. However, there are various treatments and lifestyle changes we made to help manage this condition. In October of 2025, Rachel started traveling again with our family on deputation, and we continued to pray and trust for a divine healing. We are thankful that each day God is sustaining us, and that her strength is slowly returning. Now, as you listen to this episode, just remember that the Desi in this podcast doesn't know the positive developments that are right around the corner for his family. But I think that makes our conversation here even more powerful, and I hope you gain insight and encouragement from it as well. If you are suffering or struggling with your faith right now, I really encourage you to listen to this. And lastly, small disclaimer. We did have some technical difficulties recording this episode, so you may notice that the audio is not as good as we would all prefer. I did my best to make it as good as possible, but I apologize for any inconvenience. Please do stick around, though. This conversation was deeply moving, and I really do believe there's a lot to glean from the wisdom and spirit Desi communicated during our time together here. All right, enough preliminaries. Let's get into the episode. Welcome to the Reflective Ecclesia podcast. Our aim is to edify the church towards deep thought and Christ-centered action. Let's jump right in. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. I have the pleasure of talking again to my dear friend and missionary, Desi Lugo. Today, we're going to be talking mostly about suffering and faith crises. And I want to start us off with a story of suffering. It starts long ago on some judo mats in the upstairs of a church. There was a young man who will not be named. It was me. Who helped somebody else in our church start a judo club ministry in our church. Very peculiar, but we wanted to start a judo club ministry. So we got all these mats, we laid them out, and we began to train each other and invite others to join the club, so to speak, fight club. First rule of fight club is don't tell stories about fight club. But we began to train and get on the mats, and one of the early recruits to fight club was future missionary and spreader of the gospel, but at that point in time, fearsome cage warrior, Desi Lugo.
Not at all. Nothing like it.
Yeah.
I was looking for something to do with my two sons.
Well, Desi and his two sons showed up and asked to train with us, and we began to train, and at the time, I was not known for my restraint in training, to say nicely, very poor sparring partner, and I would just
Nathan was very aggressive. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, and it
was like, and full speed.
In my mind, it was like iron sharpens iron. Baptism by fire. Obviously, in hindsight, maybe don't just tackle people who just showed up and barely put their name on the sign-in sheet. But hindsight 2020. You can't do anything about it. Anyway, I spent a good period of time in one training session, wrestling with Desi and his sons and a bunch of other people, and we were practicing throws, and of course I'm slamming people, they're slamming me, I'm tackling people, and I'm just loving it. This is what I want to do, and in my mind, I'm going to raise the bar for us. Well, as you can probably imagine, listeners, that may be appreciated by some select few madmen, but others maybe don't appreciate just getting.
It wasn't appreciated by an early 30-something-year-old father there with his 10-year-old kids.
Sure.
Just looking for some sort of
Yeah.
physical activity and to get my boys involved. And
You're just going to go get tackled upstairs in the church for no reason.
Yeah.
For
it was not what I was expecting.
So I get called in to a meeting of the elders, and I helped start this judo club. And so to get called into a meeting of the elders at my own club is kind of like, what do you mean? Like, I didn't even know this was possible. And, did I miss a memo? And they sat me down, my partner who stopped me start the club and Desi, I don't know if anybody else was there, but they
I think it was the three of us.
Sat me down and just basically said, "Hey, you got to dial it back.
You got to slow down, Nate. It's like you're being too aggressive with brand new people."
And how does this relate to suffering and faith crises? What are we talking about? Well, they revealed to me. Desi revealed to me. Go ahead and give.
I don't know that he was reminding me of this story, and I haven't thought about this in years. But Nathan was frustrated that we weren't just going at it.
Are we here to train, or are we here to
play
patty cake? What are we here for?
He's like, no, we just got to go for it, and you got to toughen up. I'm like, well,
I was 17, 18 at the time.
Yeah. He was a young adult, barely an adult, and he was ready to just go at the world hardcore. And I was trying to explain to him that not everyone was ready to do that.
Right. And he revealed that he had a cracked rib and had been, for the sake of training his boys, had been allowing me to just body slam him for several hours straight. And, and he has this cracked rib. And I remember at that moment, realizing, okay, if this person had a cracked rib, I mean, even if they didn't, but especially if they had a cracked rib, I never had a single inkling that he was in pain the entire time.
To be fair, I want to make this clear. Nathan did not crack my rib.
No.
I had already been injured. It was
right.
I already had a cracked rib.
So some might say that's on Desi for showing up to judo practice with a cracked rib.
I was trying to do something with my kids, and I didn't know I was going to be body checked 40 times in one night.
Well,
by a very aggressive young man who needed to go at it.
Well, at no point in those 40 body slams did I catch a hint that Desi was in pain. And I remember thinking at that point in time, okay, well, one, I need to take a massive chill pill because these are my friends and they're telling me, slow down. But two, Desi is super tough. Because if he went through all that and didn't even the poker face never cracked, he must be able to endure some pain. And now that's more of a funny story, a coming of age story of a young man who needed to, chill out.
Calm down.
yeah, for sure. But that began to teach me something about Desi at that time, which is his ability to process pain. And as we began to grow in our relationship with each other and talk through suffering in the world and other big questions I began to have as I grew into adulthood, suffering and how to make sense of suffering was a big part of my questions. And Desi was a really instrumental person in helping me answer some of those questions because he himself has been through, if I may, without forcing you to get more vulnerable, but probably more than a proportionately expected share of suffering has been meted out.
And I'll let you say it that way.
Sure. For those who have listened to other conversations we've had, and have listened to the story of his missions journey and all they've endured out on the field, you probably already have come to that realization that this is a person who's very willing to sacrifice for the kingdom of God. But as we dialogue about suffering, I want Desi, you to, before we talk about the suffering in the world, go ahead and answer for us. Let the audience hear from you. How do you approach suffering as someone who's had to carry so much of it in your life, without trying to make you a martyr or make you feel uncomfortable?
No. Okay.
How do you process through suffering?
So, a conversation about my background would probably be a different podcast altogether. And I will say that suffering looks different for different people. There's no one standard of this. And we get into some really weird territory. And I would really say some bad theology for like comparing this person and that one, or like, oh, this one's suffering and that one's not really suffering, or like this is real suffering and that's just kind of sort of, forget all that. Pain, disappointment, rejection, frustration, failed expectations, grief, suffering, all of these are real. They're all part of the human experience. And at some point in our life, we're all going to go through that. I think the reality is that some people end up with more suffering in their life than others. And that suffering looks different for everyone. I will make this one comment. I'm willing to say this, that my childhood was not pleasant. And I did not grow up in a home where both of my parents were living a God-fearing apostolic life. And domestic violence was very much a part of my story as a child. And visits from the county sheriff's office because neighbors had made calls about domestic disturbances because they could hear what was going on. And when I was 15, Child Protective Services separated my family, if you will, in the sense that they gave my mother an ultimatum that she either got a restraining order against my father or we were all going to be put in foster care.
Wow.
And so that's all the level of detail I want to do right now. The point being that long before I met Nathan, long before I ever left my home, I had, and everyone's story is different, but in my own world, I had been through a lot of physical pain, and I have a high pain tolerance, and I had been through a lot of mental anguish, and I left home at 17, and I was a very frustrated, angry, cynical, kind of bitter young man. And I ended up going to Bible school, and I didn't really even want to go to Bible school. And I was frustrated that I was there, and I felt like my hand was kind of forced by God, and that's not what I wanted to do in life. And it forced me to grapple through some of these questions about suffering at an earlier age than maybe other people are forced to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Now, going to that ministry training program for me was absolutely the right decision. God's hand was all in that. He was gracious and merciful to me, and I was able to work through that in time. But when it comes to suffering, I, for a long time, started from the position of, like, why me? And this is unfair. And my life is extra difficult, or more injustice has been done to me than has been done to other people. And then deeper than that were the questions of why would God allow this? Mm-hmm. And those are, if you want to use the fancy theological term, these are theodicy questions. These are questions about why God allows pain, why God allows suffering. It's the, where are you, God, in this moment? And if God is real, why does he allow these things to happen? Mm. And I had to sort through that. And for me, my idea of suffering and how to get through it developed during my 20s as I began to recognize that suffering is part of the human condition as a result of evil. Mm. And if I just kind of skip a few chapters and jump towards the end, if we believe in autonomy and if we believe in free will, and I say if because I recognize there are people out there who don't see it this way, but if I'm going to, and I do very much believe in autonomy and free will, and if I'm going to accept that premise, then I have to accept with that the understanding that God is going to allow evil to happen in the world. And if he does not allow evil, then we don't have true free choice. Hmm. Now, this doesn't make it okay. This doesn't make it a good thing. And that doesn't unpack everything. But I came to understand that if I'm going to have a choice to serve God, then I also have the choice to reject righteousness, to reject things of the scripture, to reject a relationship with him. And a life that is devoid of spiritual moorings, a life that is devoid of righteousness, a life that is devoid of service to God, or even if you want to be more generic, a higher power or some sort of faith credo or some sort of religious background, is going to lead to a world with pain and suffering and brokenness and selfishness. And it doesn't mean that these are good things. It doesn't mean that God likes these things. It doesn't mean that God loves you less if you've gone through this. But suffering is part of the human package, living in a sinful, broken world. And I am not guaranteed that I will not have suffering. No one is immune to suffering. Living for God doesn't mean that I am protected from suffering. Living for God doesn't mean that I have a life that's free of pain or disappointment or rejection, failed expectations, bad relationships, etc. But living a life where I am endeavoring to walk close to Jesus and be obedient to the scriptures reorients my understanding of suffering. And it helps me to recognize that I am not alone, that I do not walk through life without hope, and that many times it is in the very act of suffering, it is during a time of pain that I can learn to hear God's voice. It's through that pain and that suffering that I can learn how to connect and relate with others. I can learn how to see beyond myself. There are some things that are only birthed in fire.
Okay. Building on that point, there's a phrase I've heard often in Christianity or in Christian circles that I see everybody else resonating with, and I don't fully understand why they're resonating with it. But maybe it's because of what you just said. Let me explain. Someone will say, basically, if there wasn't a problem, I wouldn't know he's a problem solver. You know, if I didn't have cancer, I wouldn't know he's a healer of cancer, and all these things. And I find myself thinking, like, you know,
I think that expression's starting at the wrong place.
Well, but I've heard it quite often. I've heard it in songs, I've heard it in sermons, I've heard it in conversations, and that seems to mean something to a lot of people. So I want to be careful when attacking that sentiment, because that seems to be the place that a lot of people have landed to make peace with their suffering. On the other side of it is, you know, and they'll say stories like, you know, if I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't have this, and I just imagine thinking. I don't have this analogy playing out, but like imagining, like, if I were to punch my son in the head and then go take him to get prayed for at the altar and he gets healed, and we're like, well, you know, we wouldn't know that God's a healer unless, you know, we had to go through that to know that God was a healer. And it's like, okay, was the juice worth the squeeze? Like yes, God's a healer. Now I know that on the other end, but like that's a horrible thing that you just did, and it's a horrible thing he just experienced. Yes, now we have the knowledge and the peace that God's a healer, but obviously this insane scenario I just painted.
That's a ridiculous scenario, and I think that's your point.
That's the point. Like, and you could ramp it up. You know, like, oh, I had to have cancer to know he's a cancer healer, and like, well, I do have the opportunity to know he's a cancer healer. Like, but is that why God allowed the cancer to happen? Like, is so that I could know he could heal? Like that. If I was a father,
I don't know that I would explain it that way. Well, I don't feel comfortable with.
And I'm not saying that's the best way to explain it. I'm saying that's the way.
And if that is what has allowed someone to process through their experience and come to peace with it, then, you know, who am I to discredit that? That's not how I would view that, though. That's not how I would explain that. Human beings are beautifully and wonderfully made. We are incredibly complex, emotional, spiritual, and cognitive beings. And there's an overlap between these different elements. And God has made us in his image. He has given us autonomy, the power to create and the power to destroy. And he has allowed us the freedom of choice to decide whether or not we will serve him. Okay, so why choice? Well, if there's no choice, can we truly love him? If we're hardwired
Yeah.
and it's decided for us ahead of time that we will worship him and we will obey and that we will love him, is it really love if we don't have choice?
No.
I would say that it's not unless we have choice. But if I have choice, then that means I have the option to choose not to obey. I have the option to choose not to love. I have the option to choose
To hurt others.
not to serve him. And people make selfish choices and people make hurtful decisions. And people are complex. It's an oversimplification to say that, everybody's like someone is all bad or someone is all good. There's always a mix in there. I look in my own scenario and in the violence of my childhood, and it would be a mistake to demonize my history with my father. He's more complex than that. I don't have a good relationship with my father. I'm not close with my father, but he's not an evil entity. He's a broken human being who has made poor choices throughout his lifetime. And those choices have directly impacted his personal relationships and his family. And yet, as I've gotten older and over time, I've heard bits and pieces of my own father's story. He grew up in that same brokenness that he then perpetuated. Now, that doesn't excuse his behavior, but it does give context for it. And we're still responsible for our own decisions. And that's just one flavor of it. All right, so that's abuse. What about someone who didn't grow up in a physically abusive environment? So let's say it's someone who lives with a long-term illness. This one still hits with home. My wife, Rachel, has lived with some long-term sicknesses throughout her lifetime. She has a couple autoimmune conditions.
There are some people in the audience that I know are listening to this that are interested in what you have to say who are in the same boat, for what it's worth.
And so I am a man of faith. My wife is a man of faith. We're apostolic Pentecostals. I believe in the moving and the power of the Holy Spirit. I have prayed with people and watched the miraculous. And over 22 years of marriage, I have also lost track of the number of times my wife has been prayed for. And yet, she still persists with a body that at times is very frail. Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's not. She still lives with several autoimmune conditions that directly impact her health. And physically, my wife has nowhere near the strength that she would like to have. And it's very frustrating for her. And at times it's felt very, very debilitating. Yet at the same time, I would also argue that my wife is one of the strongest people I know. But I'm not talking about physical strength. I'm talking about her mental fortitude. I'm talking about her determination. And I can't explain, and I'm not going to pretend that I understand all the reasons why Rachel has dealt with so many physical issues over her lifetime. And yet, we both continue to see a God who is faithful and who has carried us through. And I believe that God is going to bring a healing to my wife. And we pray for her healing. But even more than, often my prayer, most days my prayer is, Lord, I know that one day you're going to heal Rachel. But until you choose to do that, give her the strength that she needs for today.
Why?
See, that's not fun, is it?
No.
It's not like...
Why would your response not be... Let's go down a couple paths.
Sure.
Why would your response not be anger, perhaps even justified anger, or confusion, based off the same issue as doesn't Scripture promise us that there's power and authority in the name of Jesus, and so Jesus is real, God is real, and he's not just this deist out there abstract concept. He wants to be involved, yet he wants to give us free will. So he's got to strike this delicate balance of intervening but not overriding free will, and however that only in his perfect mind he knows how to do that. Like how are you not angry at God for not fulfilling what it appears Scripture, from how I often understand it, to say? anger or confusion, why is it, God, I trust you, and God, give me the strength to persist, instead of, God, you promised something and you're not following through. I don't want to speak that into your situation,
Sure.
but
No.
why
That's a fair question.
Why are you so healthy with it?
Okay.
Be more healthy. No.
So a couple things. First off, anger is a secondary emotion. Nobody starts angry. Something happens, then you get angry. You're scared, then you're angry. You're frustrated, then you're angry. You're disappointed, then you're angry. Something else. And so anger is secondary to some other emotional response first. Now, this is a hard thing, and it's a challenge. But I also believe that anger is a choice, and I can choose to let go. Yes, it can flash up quickly. But then do I latch onto that and hold on to it, or do I let it go and release it? Mm-hmm. That's the choice part that I have. And when it comes to this situation with Rachel, and I realize I'm the one that you're talking to and Rachel's not here, but we've had many long talks about this. And so when I'm speaking, I'm representing both of us and where we have ended up in our marriage with this, with her physical limitations at times. I don't understand. And I have learned to stop pursuing answers that I can't find. Well, there has to be a reason for this. I'm sure there is. Well, I need to know why God is allowing this to happen, or why let God. Do I have to understand it, or do I just want to understand it? And I believe that I don't have to understand it. Would I like to understand it? Yes, but he has not chosen to answer that for me. And so I choose to say, Lord, I don't understand this, but I'm going to trust you. Faith is always a choice. Trust is a choice. And so I choose to accept that there is something happening here and God is at work in it, and that it will work for his good. He will receive glory out of it, and that it won't always be this way. All right, so what if Desi's wrong? What if there's no God? Okay? What if there is, I don't have any problem walking down this trail either. What if there's no God? What if it is random chance and suffering is just part of a diseased world, and this is a genetic abnormality that happened in my wife's body, and therefore she has a couple autoimmune conditions, and there's nothing that can be done about it, and it is total random chance. Okay, so let's say that's right too. So what? Do I get angry at natural selection? Do I rage against the machine, whatever that machine is? Do I accept my fate and have a nihilistic worldview that's more self-destructive? My point is, the alternatives to the path that I've chosen end up in even worse places. Even if I'm wrong, even if you could prove me wrong, which you can't, but let's say someone philosophically could argue me into a corner and demonstrate through whatever means that I am misguided in how I have chosen to approach the situation. Any alternative to the way that I have chosen to approach this situation doesn't lead to a better outcome.
What about believing, and don't laugh at this, but
yeah,
what about entertaining the idea, as maybe some of my listeners may have, hopefully not, but may have entertained, that God is real and he's evil, or there is a God and
he's malevolent or malevolent, excuse me,
or he's chaotic,
or he's chaotic or unpredictable, or other things like that.
Yeah, well, he's certainly unpredictable, but you can be good and unpredictable.
Yes, correct. But I meant like chaos as in storm and
for its own
structure.
sake.
Yes.
I don't even know how to make sense of that, but I feel for a lot of people, whenever they sit convinced of arguments for God's existence, like they aren't convinced of the arguments for atheism. They see, like, okay, so everything came from nothing.
So they can acknowledge a creator.
So they can acknowledge the creator.
Yes.
And then and they don't will entertain arguments, but they can feel mostly confident there, and then they will look around and be like, all right, but that creator can't be
positive.
yeah,
Yeah,
because
this isn't a good
because you
thing.
got kids out here dying of cancer. You got if there was suffering as a result of human choice, which that's a large portion and probably more than we realize. Portion of our suffering is due to our own choices, directly or indirectly. Totally down for that, and for that, the free will and love argument of God that makes sense. But then layering on top of that is tsunami just randomly pops up and wipes out a city. Like, or a child just gets cancer and dies, and
Sure.
like,
And these are very real.
right, like
Yeah.
for that kind of stuff, it seems to make like the only way to put those two puzzle pieces together is to say that there's a God, and he's either very incompetent, very uncaring, or he's evil. Like some version of God that is not the God that we have been told to believe in, this Jesus figure who sacrifices himself for us.
Yeah.
And who is willing, if we, in the power of his name, to bring healing. If they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. Like that picture of God can't be right. Like how would you begin to grapple? I don't expect you to whip out like a 30-page thesis of how to rebut an evil God argument.
You just sprung this on me. But off the top of my head, just
how would you begin to approach and process this?
So if someone wanted to have an argument for the sake of an argument, I'm probably not going to be interested. If someone wants to have dialogue and they're genuinely grappling and wrestling through this with this kind of scenario, I can empathize with that. And so I would start by listening. I just want to hear what they're saying. And buried somewhere in those conclusions, we don't reach those conclusions in abstract. So someone who has come to that level of conclusion, their own story is going to intersect with pain and suffering and something that has led them to this conclusion. So I'd be very curious where their background is and where that came from. And not that I'd have answers for the background, but it would give me a frame of reference for how to approach it with them. If that's what it is, and if that is the nature of God, if I do accept that, then where does that leave me, and what do we do then? Where do we go from there?
Yeah, anger still.
So maybe I end up back at frustration or anger, and what does that accomplish for me?
Yeah,
I'm not trying to be flippant.
No,
but you're talking to a 42-year-old man who spent the first 15 years of my adult life, not my childhood, the first 15 years of my adult life, kicking this around and being angry on and off and dealing with that frustration. And from age 17 to 32, I had a lot of unprocessed anger. It didn't help. There was no net gain, no net positive from that. And so learning to process and work through that, again, even if I'm wrong, I'm in a much better place spiritually and emotionally and mentally now than I was when I was still angry at the universe.
So you're saying, regardless of whether the God exists, whether he's good, bad, evil, good, bad, or ugly, like the appropriate posture toward the world is not one of anger. Like
it's not going to help you. It's not going to. Nothing good comes from staying angry. So let's say, again, philosophical exercise here. Let's say someone could conclusively prove either A, there is no God, or they could conclusively prove that the supreme being, the creator, God, whatever you want to say, is either distant and remote and uninvolved, or they're chaotic, or they have the evil intent. Even if that was right, which I absolutely do not think is the case.
No, nor do I.
What does staying angry accomplish? What does becoming cynical accomplish?
I guess.
And I suppose it's not fair for me to expect you to answer it. That's the question I would want to pose.
I guess it would allow.
How's that working out for you, boss? It doesn't.
I guess maybe it would allow somebody to feel validated. That, like, I'm angry and I'm hurt and I deserve to be angry and hurt.
Okay.
Because...
All right, so let's come to validation. All right, so let's come to that.
That would be the utility.
Pain, yeah. So pain is real. The suffering is real. And if someone's looking for validation that their pain and suffering is real, I wouldn't take anything away from that. I'm in no way denying that aspect of it. And the emotional response to that pain and that suffering, to that rejection and disappointment, that's certainly real and warranted. But I would say a healthy posture is going to work through that. So there is a biblical way to work through that.
What is it?
And so that's lament. But let me come back to that in a moment. So if we can pause there, I'm going to come back to that.
Sure.
And let me back up and can I share a personal story?
Please.
About some of the way that Rachel and I have had to reorient our understanding of suffering and what it does. When we first came to Vanuatu, it was in early 22. We started our missions journey in 21. We left the United States April 1st of 22. We didn't actually make it to Vanuatu until the middle of February. Or not February, May. And it was May 18th because it was 2 days after our son's birthday. And so we spent 6 weeks in Australia. We left the United States, then there was another border closure, and then we ended up in Australia, kind of in limbo for 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And so we finally make it the middle of May to Vanuatu, and they put us in quarantine and isolation on this tiny little island out in the middle of the bay. And at the end of 3 days, they tested us all for COVID, and myself and all 3 kids tested negative for COVID. And they let us out of quarantine, but Rachel tested positive for COVID, which was bizarre because we tested negative, she tested positive. We had all quarantined together. They let us out of quarantine, but they made Rachel quarantine an extra week by herself. So she spent 10 days in quarantine before they let her out. We're now new on the island. We had only been on the island another week or 2 after this, and she started getting really sick and having this pain in her right side. There's no hospital by a true Western standard to speak of in Vanuatu. Sometimes there are doctors who run little clinics. Sometimes there are not. Doctors come and go. There are pharmacies. Sometimes they have medicine. Sometimes they don't. Fortunately, at that time, there were a couple clinics open. We're able to go get an evaluation and come to find out that Rachel now has an infection in her right kidney. Now, we're in Vanuatu, and there is not proper medical treatment for this infection.
So this is bad news.
It's not good. And so for her to get proper medical treatment, we're going to have to leave Vanuatu. It means we're going to New Zealand or Australia to seek medical help. That's the next best option. And so we prayed about it. And I am certainly not going to make this decision for Rachel. And so I asked her, well, baby, what do you want to do? And she prayed about it. And she came back and she said, I feel to stay. And Rachel made the conscious decision, knowing she had a kidney infection, to stay in a country where she could not get medical treatment for that kidney infection. Because that's what she felt to do in prayer. Now, how foolish or not foolish that was is not the point of this story right now. She chose to stay. And the Lord was with us. And we're apostolic, and we believe in the supernatural. And I believe in the power of the Holy Spirit and in praying in Jesus' name. And I would love to tell you this story about how I laid hands on my wife's side and prayed in the name of Jesus. And there was this instantaneous, miraculous healing. That is not what happened. She actually got sicker. And then she stayed sick for a long time, for weeks. She didn't get better.
Wow.
She stayed sick. Now, God was with us through that time, and eventually her body was able to work through that, and we were able to get some antibiotics, but not enough. And she was able to recover from that kidney infection, but it was a long, slow, painful, miserable, debilitating process that just drained her of her energy. And we live on this Bible school campus property, and it's on a hillside, and it overlooks this bay, and it's this beautiful piece of property, and we live in an apartment towards the bottom of the hill, and the other building with the Bible school classrooms is at the top of the hill. And we've got about a 300-yard walk up this curved hill path to get up to the main building. The main building's 2 stories, and the main Bible school classroom is upstairs. And so when it was Rachel's turn to teach each week, I would walk with her up the hill, which was exhausting to her. And then we would walk up the stairs to the second story. And by the time she got into the classroom, she was white. And so I would get a chair and I would sit it at the front of the classroom, a folding chair. And she would sit down in that chair in front of the group of students, and she would open her textbook and lay it out in her lap and sit there in front of the students and teach with her textbook just open in her lap, because it's all she had the energy to do. She didn't even have the energy to stand up. And it was demeaning. It was humiliating. It was embarrassing. It was, we felt like failures. And the whispers of the enemy are speaking to us and telling us, go home. You don't belong here. You're not strong enough to do this, and you're not cut out for missions work, and you don't have the strength to take care of this, and et cetera, et cetera. And we're just mentally, we're taking this beating, if you will. Incidentally, later on, I've had many conversations with other missionary families who had similar stories of some sort of long-term physical ailment, either when they got to the field or shortly afterwards, and there wasn't a quick healing. And for whatever reason, we don't tend to talk about that as much in missionary circles publicly, but it's a very common occurrence. And so we're having this experience, and we're feeling like we are an embarrassment. We're feeling like we're failing as missionaries. And God, wouldn't it make so much more sense if we prayed in Jesus' name and you demonstrated your divine, miraculous power? And what a faith-building exercise for our students, right?
For sure. It makes all sense.
From our perspective, but that's not what he did. And she stayed sick. And we had to learn to live out the biblical principle that in our weakness, he receives glory and we find strength in him. Because here's what we did not realize was going on. We had been forewarned when we first came to Vanuatu, being the developing world, that there was a significant socioeconomical gap between us and the students. And it was going to take a long time to bridge that gap and make connections with them. And we were just told, and we were aware of that. And we're doing everything we can to be friendly, to be coming, to be engaging, to connect with the students. But the reality is we're the rich Americans. They're not. And we will never live in their world. We will never be, in their minds, the way that they are. And at the same time, we're dealing with all of this suffering. We're dealing with this physical ailment, this lack of energy, the pain that was radiating her right side, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The students are watching all of this. And we feel like we are failing. But later, once we got through that experience, some of the students came to talk to us. And we had no clue how they were processing this. Because while we were feeling like a failure, the students were watching what was happening. And they were talking with each other, because they told us later on. And what they saw was that Rachel was sick, just like they got sick.
It humanized you.
Rachel didn't have medicine, just like they didn't have medicine. There was no hospital for Rachel to go to, just like they didn't have a hospital to go to. But Rachel didn't leave.
Interesting.
And so it humanized us. You're absolutely right. But it also put us in community with them. And me going from strength to strength to strength, and power to power, and faith and miracle to miracle doesn't build community with people in valleys.
Absolutely. And there's a parallel here that I recognize. I'm not saying Rachel's Jesus. Nobody's Jesus except for Jesus. But, imagine asking the question of, why doesn't the Father heal Jesus? Why, if he be God, if he's the Son, let the angels take him down off the cross. The person who had the authority to provide healing in that moment, who had healed others, did not receive healing the way that they were expecting, and would have made sense.
And he chose to go through that suffering.
But in so doing that, in a way that nobody could have foreseen, he was humanizing himself to put himself into community with us.
Hebrews language, he becomes this mediator.
Yes.
Yes.
But he allows us to connect to him. That suffering the very fact that he wasn't healed in the way that we would, nobody laid hands on Jesus when he was on the cross, and
He didn't
you know,
call down a legion of angels
like
to come and
is what allowed us to come into community with him. And so certainly
You're absolutely right.
The power of God to provide healing is certainly evident through Jesus' own ministry, like constantly. Um, and
But
there's something greater than healing that was at play, which is the healing of the community, the healing of a greater healing was
absolutely.
taking place through a brokenness. An unhealing was facilitating a greater healing that nobody could realize.
And I don't even pretend to fully understand everything that was happening, but I do know because they came and told us that through that experience, it was Rachel's sickness and suffering that connected us to the students, gave us community with the students.
So,
and I'm not saying this is the whole purpose for suffering, and I don't want to give an overly glib or pat answer, but suffering does create community.
There's that we may know him and the fellowship of his
You're
suffering.
getting ahead of me. Yes.
Sorry.
So yes, that's where I was going next. Because we like the first part of that verse. Because this is where Paul says that I may know him in the power of his resurrection.
Woo. The healing.
Oh yeah, we love that. Power over death, the power of resurrection. That's significant. But that's not all Paul says. He said the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his suffering. So Paul wants to know Jesus in his power. But Paul found fellowship with Jesus. Or to use the word we just used, community with Jesus in suffering.
The greatest wound done to creation is the dividing of heaven and earth, the sin that puts enmity between the source of life and the tree of
fractured the world. Yes.
And so the greatest healing that needs to take place is not the cancers, and all those things will be dealt with eventually, or in the temporal, either or, but they will be dealt with. But those are all ripple effects of the much deeper wound that needs to be healed, which is the divide between man and God and man to man. That is through sin.
Agreed.
And so God finding way to use suffering. God may choose to end suffering and just heal as a way to bring glory and inspire healing in the community. Or he could choose to use suffering itself as a way to heal that greater rift. And then once mankind is reconciled to God, then every tear will be wiped away, and all that stuff will happen as well.
I learned to hear God's voice differently, and I would say in a more powerful way, in a valley than I ever will on a mountaintop. And I learn empathy, and I learn to connect with my fellow man in the broad sense, with humanity, men and women, through shared suffering, far more than I do through shared pleasure or shared joy or shared victory or shared common interest.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And so God works through that. And when we suffer, not if, when we suffer, I can choose, again, choice, I can choose to become despondent. I can choose to be angry, bitter, disappointed, etc. Or I can make the conscious choice, and you have to make this repeatedly. It's not a one-time thing. I can make the conscious choice that I am going to trust that God is at work in this and he can use it for his glory. And so it's the God I don't understand. We had that conversation, that book by Chris Wright, The God I Don't Understand. We talked about that before. I don't understand this. Now watch this. Watch this. If he's really genuinely king, if he's really genuinely sovereign, which I do believe, then he doesn't owe me an explanation. I don't like that answer, but that doesn't make it any less true. And so I choose, I keep emphasizing that deliberately because it's a choice. I choose to trust even when I don't understand.
So we've talked through how this conversation started with what is the proper response to pain and suffering in yourself or in the world. And we talked about how anger, confusion are natural responses. And I brought up how could maybe even questioning the character of God be a warranted response, or at least expected response.
Yes.
Sorry, just to summarize real quick. And where we've kind of gone to is that, like, regardless of whether God is good, bad, or ugly, there or not there, there's a couple of responses to make to that point, which is, one, anger still is not the appropriate response, either because it's not
a healthy response.
It's not healthy. It's not useful to you, no matter what. The second response,
and we all deal with anger at times. Let me be more precise. Staying angry.
Yes.
Staying angry
and bitterness
is not a healthy response.
So
getting bitter is not a healthy response.
The next possible way through, I want to say not out, but through, is to begin to look for reasons that may be greater than you originally understood, while still being willing to accept that you may never get your reasons if God chooses to not give you an answer. But if you begin to ask God for answers, he may give you more than you think, and you may begin to understand the fellowship of his sufferings, and you may begin to eventually, if he allows, see how your suffering or somebody else's suffering began to increase and heal community, which is hearkening back to much greater healing in the spiritual realm that needs to happen. So these are all on the table responses, with still leaving that confusion response on the table as well, because you may never see how it connects. Maybe
absolutely, you may not.
But throughout all those responses we've laid out so far, there's one more that you said we'd circle back to,
and that's what I wanted to get to. Yes,
the emphasis is being made on choice. Like I choose to put my life in his hands and to trust him and to walk with him no matter what. That is the best path forward. But there's another path forward, and maybe it still is choosing to follow him. But you said the path of lament, the biblical path of lament. What is the biblical path of lament? Take me to school, missionary. Does he?
Yes.
Please.
All right. So this is a concept that I did not understand when I was young, and I really didn't come to an understanding of this till I was in my 30s and in seminary, and it was so immensely helpful to me. And I am not an expert on this, so this isn't my area of training, but I walked long enough to learn some of this. And so let's unpack this when we talk about lament. So lament is something that we see all through the scriptures, especially in the Old Testament. In fact, we have an entire book of lament in the Old Testament called
Lamentations.
Why
do we call it Lamentations as opposed to Lamentations?
It's fair enough. I don't know why we pronounce it that way, but it's a collection of these poetic writings.
You're not laminating things.
Not lamentations like I'm laminating. No, lamenting. It's multiple laments. In this case, with the prophet Jeremiah over the destruction of the city of Jerusalem. Okay. Very quickly, let me go there, and then we'll back up and describe Lent. Jeremiah has been prophesying for decades at this point that this was coming, and nobody would listen to him.
Jerusalem's destruction.
Jerusalem's destruction is coming, and we've earned it. God's bringing his punishment upon us because of our rebellion, and we've earned it, and they won't listen to him. In fact, they threw him in jail for saying this.
Sounds like a terrible party.
He's a horrible party guest, and he's like an anti-nationalist, right? And so they just shut him up, they put him in jail, and then look, he's right. And the city's destroyed, and he's freed from jail by the very people who destroy the city. And there's starvation, and there's desperation, and there's even cannibalism. That's because they've gotten to the point of famine and starvation. Everything is burnt down. And rather than being validated like, I was right, it was, oh no, I was right. And you didn't listen. And now Jeremiah, the old man, is watching everything he prophesied come true. And they're horrible prophecies. And it was warning of coming judgment, and the people did not listen. They did not repent. And now God has poured out, he's meted out this punishment upon them. And so Jeremiah begins to write these laments over the destruction of Jerusalem.
He must have wished he was wrong.
I think that comes through in his writing, that he wished he was wrong. And so that collection of these poetic writings that he wrote in this period together are what we call the Book of Lamentations.
Wonderful. Okay.
So now, what's a lament? Yeah, so let's work backwards now. So Jeremiah is not the only one who writes lament. The Psalms are full of lament, and we see lament in other places in Scripture. And a lament, and by the way, the older I get, the more I appreciate lament and how beautiful it is, because lament is a process where a person comes before God and they give vent to their pain, to their frustration, to their anger, it's someone asking God, where are you? Why did you let this happen?
Okay.
Where were you when this occurred? Why didn't you stop this from happening? Why is this continuing to be? How long, oh Lord, will you let this continue?
Okay.
And so they give voice to the pain. They give voice to that rawness. They give voice to that frustration, that disappointment, that confusion. They vomit up all of those questions that are inappropriate.
So what you're telling me is that this pathway, is this an evil God? This conversation we're having is an old conversation.
It's an ancient conversation, not an old conversation. This is thousands and thousands, millennia, multiple millennia old. This is an ancient conversation.
Educated.
And you find it across multiple different groups of people, not just in the ancient Near East, but in many cultures. And they come to different answers or non-answers about how to deal with pain and suffering and injustice and evil in the world. The biblical response is a lament. And a lament is where you voice all those questions, all those things that proper good religion teaches us don't say. All the taboo questions are welcomed in lament. Where are you? How long? Why? This isn't fair. It's unjust. And so you give voice to that to God. Okay? But then here's the beauty of it. Lament is more than just asking the questions. Because if all I did was just ask the questions, and if all I did was just rail against the heavens of God, this is not fair, that's a complaint. A complaint.
You've lodged a complaint.
A complaint parks.
Yeah.
I've lodged it and I stop. A lament, and this is what makes it lament, a lament has movement.
Okay.
So a lament starts with the questions. It starts with the emotion. It starts with the scripture. Go read the Psalms and you will see some beautiful Psalms. And these are the ones we do in church and turn into worship songs that talk of his majesty and his greatness, and we proclaim his power. And that's the praise Psalms. But there are just as many, if not more, Psalms that are on the, where are you? And I feel like I'm drowning and I'm overwhelmed and surrounded on every side by my enemies. And it voices all this. But then lament moves beyond that, where lament gives it to God, releases it to God, and then says, but you're still God. You're sovereign. And yet I would choose to worship you, Lord. Lament says, I express all of this. And I ask my questions. And then I acknowledge that he's still God. See, complaint just parks. Lament now moves beyond the pain and the questions. Ask the questions. Say these things out loud. Have a conversation with God. Ask him all of the why, and this is not fair, and this is how I feel. But then acknowledge, but you're God, and you're still in control. So me reaching the point in life where I can say, I choose to trust him when I don't understand, is part of that lament process. And sometimes, here and there, I find pieces of an answer. Sometimes God is gracious to us, like that one example where these students came to us later and we began to at least see in part what was happening through that experience. Sometimes I don't get answers, but I give voice to this rather than keeping it bottled up inside. And then I hand it to God and say, nevertheless, you're sovereign. You're king. And I choose to trust you with this.
I don't want to be inconsiderate, put you on the spot necessarily, but I kind of feel to ask at least, and if you decline, totally fine. I don't feel as uncomfortable. Could you lead us in a lament? Could we form one together? Maybe five stanzas. Like, could we? Is there a way the audience can be shown how we can lament? Is there a structure? Is there something that it doesn't mean we have to pray?
Yeah.
Like we just lay hands on each other and pray right now. But can you walk me through how to lament? If you were going to how about this?
Okay.
Teach me as if I'm a child, as if I'm 5. And I'll say this because my 3-year-old, believe it or not, is asking questions about why are people dying and all these things. I'm having to answer heavier questions than I thought I was going to have to answer it for a 3-year-old. How about this? Walk me through, show me, example for me, however way, a lament as if I'm a child. And maybe the audience can glean from some example of this, if we can.
Yeah. And again, this is not my area of expertise, so I'm not going to write poetry for you because I'm not that guy. No. And some of the laments in the scriptures are beautiful.
And I'm sorry if this question is inconsiderate. I don't mean to make you do it. Improv.
Just give me a second to think on how to frame that. And let me say this. And yes, I'm willing to do that. So give me a moment to process that. But let me also say this. I love the fact that lament is in Scripture. And the older I get, the more I appreciate it in the Psalms because I realize that the full gamut of human emotion is represented in the Psalms. And earlier in life, I thought it's inappropriate to talk to God this way. And it's inappropriate to ask these questions. And as I get older, I realize, no, there's disrespectful ways, but then there is an appropriate way to give voice to this emotion. God created us and we're incredibly complex beings. And so he gave us the ability for anger, for frustration, for disappointment, for wonder and bewilderment and all of that. So if he gave it to us, then there's got to be a proper use for it, a way to work through that. Again, starting with the assumption you believe in a creator. Yeah. And I do. And so I see this even in pain and in bewilderment and everything else as coming from God. And the Psalms demonstrate to me through lament, there is an appropriate way to say, God, this isn't fair. God, I don't like this. How long, oh Lord? Why did you let this happen to me? Where are you if you're just and faithful and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm going to choose to be vulnerable with you right now. And I'll give you a real world example. So here I am, and we're on deputation this year. And at the moment, Rachel's not traveling with us. You know this. And hasn't been traveling with us for almost 3 months now. And she's dealing with some ongoing health issues. And we got back to the United States and started deputation, and we got to Easter, and then she physically almost collapsed. And originally they thought it was some heart issue. They've ruled that out. But in the process of doing all these panels, they found that Rachel is just currently depleted of most vitamins and minerals in her body. And her vitamin A, B, C, D, E, iron, testosterone, et cetera, they're all low. And for some reason, her body as she eats is not absorbing nutrients correctly. And so she's been getting medical treatment while we've been traveling, and they've been doing infusions, vitamin infusions, iron infusions, testosterone therapy, B12 shots, etc. And they're bringing these levels back up. And she is slowly getting better and recovering her strength, but we still don't understand why they dropped that low. And we're currently waiting for her to see an endocrinologist. That's the next step medically in this process. But Kendall and Dinah are traveling with me, and they haven't seen their mom in almost 3 months. I am missing my life partner. I'm missing my ministry partner. And we're in 3 to 5 churches a week right now. And I'm missing half of the person that I do all of life with. And she is not with me at this time. And she is in a physically weak state at the moment. And she's dealing with this. And I have no good answer for why this is happening. So what does a lament look like?
Yeah.
God, this doesn't seem fair. We have dedicated our life to your service. I could be doing many other things, but I choose to serve you. Rachel has spent her entire adult life working in your kingdom, and we have sacrificed so much, and we've given up our home and our furniture. We've moved to the other side of the world, and we're away from family and friends, and we no longer we almost everything we own we can fit in a 10 by 10 storage unit, and so we have very few possessions, and we're in our 40s, and we have uprooted our lives and changed our entire focus, and we're doing our best to be faithful to you. And here we are on deputation this year. And I'm trying to be an encouragement. We are trying to be an encouragement to every church we go to. And we're trying to give them a perspective on your bigger work around the world. And yet it hasn't been easy. And in fact, it just seems like it's getting worse. And she just is staying sick and she has no energy right now. And I've lost track of how many times we've prayed. And I've lost track of how many churches have prayed with us a prayer of faith, expecting you to step in and bring healing. And you haven't done it. And she's still sick. And I don't understand. And it's not fair. And this is really hard. And I don't want to do this anymore. But I choose to trust you. And I know your word tells me that you are the great physician. And you could choose to heal her in an instant. And you've given me a promise that it won't stay this way. And you told us when we chose to walk down this missionary path that you were going to bring healing and a strength to her body, not in reference to this right now, but in reference, to the bigger, broader autoimmune conditions that she's dealing with. And you haven't done that yet. And we've been walking this path for 4 years now. But I choose you. And I know you'll do it at some point. So God, I ask that you bring strength until that time comes. And God, you are still sovereign. And you are king and I am not. And I don't understand what's happening. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. And God, let there be less of me and more of you. And I pray that our lives would be used for your glory. Whatever you choose that to be. And Lord, I pray that people see you when they look at us. They don't have to remember Desi, and they don't have to remember Rachel Lugo. But let them remember your words that you speak through us. Let them see you and how we live and what we do. And if I never see a physical healing, and if we don't see divine miraculous intervention, and if we don't see amazing, powerful, demonstratable, measurable ministry results, help us to be faithful until the end. Use it for your glory. And Lord, I want to see your power. But until then, help me to know you in the fellowship of suffering. Help me to hear your voice clearly. Help me to feel your presence and to walk with you daily. Help me to see how you are at work in this, even when I don't understand. And may you receive all glory and honor and power and praise. All dominion and majesty belongs unto you. And you are the author and finisher of our faith. And one day you will make it right. And until that day comes, let us just walk faithfully with you. Probably not beautiful prose, but sincere. And I hope that demonstrated the movement in that. I mean, I meant every word I said, but I was also trying to demonstrate there's movement in that. There's acknowledgement of where we're at. There's acknowledgement of this is what it is, and I don't understand. But you're still God. And I choose to trust that. So let me come up a little bit. Let's say someone's listening to this and they think, Desi Lugo is a nut.
Yeah.
And this was, what a waste. Well, is it? If God is a complete and total figment of my imagination, what do I lose by walking in faith and hope? What do I lose by choosing to be patient in suffering? What do I lose by releasing anger, giving voice to frustration, acknowledging that it's real, but then not hanging on to it? I would stipulate, I would strongly argue that I'm in a much better place living like this than I am any other way. And this is the conclusion I've come to. And if you're listening or watching this later, maybe you come to a different conclusion than I have. But you asked me to share from my experience. Mm-hmm. And this is where I live.
I think this is a good spot to transition to our second and final topic. It's related. But before I do that, thank you for being, on behalf of myself and I'm sure the audience, thank you for being willing to share and be vulnerable and to demonstrate lament in front of us. I hope and pray that the audience is impacted as much as it's impactful to me to be able to see that modeled. Thank you for being willing to model your own pain on a stage, which I'm sure is not where you would prefer to display it. A stage per se.
That's probably not what I would have picked, but you asked, and
I appreciate it.
Limit.
Thank you, Desi. Yeah. Faith crises. That's the second topic.
All right.
As I grappled as a young man with questions about evil and suffering and then others, I became very overwhelmed and just angry, and a lot of it had to do in hindsight with the impacts of these questions to my community, because there were people who had come to different answers to some of my questions that had chosen to break from my community, and that impacted me deeply as a young man to lose people that I was close to.
Yeah.
And they had to follow the choices. I can't walk their path, but that impacted me deeply. And I remember being quite angry and just wondering, just thinking, if I can study hard enough, if I can learn enough answers to enough questions, I can stop my community from fragmenting. I can bring people into community. The answer to suffering and all these questions is through the intellect. It just is a matter of you got to read the books, you got to put in the work, and there is value to intellect.
I'll find the right answer.
it's in one of these books somewhere. So I tore through my dad's bookshelf and,
How'd that work out for you?
well, I ended up, as you soon saw, with a page full of columns. And on that page, I had written down like all the reasons why I could think of. I might still have the page, so I don't remember. But I had written down in one column all the reasons to stay, a Christian, and specifically in the apostolic movement. Another column to throw it all, with all the reasons to throw it all away, because I wanted to be fair and balanced, and then a column with just like a bunch of things that seemed like mixed bags that were notable and didn't feel like they should be ignored, but it was unclear as to like what that would mean. And I just was wrapped up in knots over it. And grappling with these questions, they began, as I sought to find the answers, I began to find like I was, downloading just as many questions as I was answers. And so they were just all accumulating in my head, and it began to just weigh very heavy on me. And I began to feel thoughts like, well, I can't responsibly continue to grow in ministry if I don't even know for sure if God exists. And but yet walking away from church and ministry is going to cause even more breaks in the community. And just like there's no path forward. I can't say I believe this with my whole, say it with my chest because I don't feel it with my chest. So what am I supposed to do? And in my infinite wisdom as a 19-year-old, however,
19 or 20, something like that.
I somehow saw through the fog, and we weren't close at the time, but said, I need to go meet with Desi and Rachel Lugo. And I, as a young man, went to their dinner table and sat down and proceeded to cry at their table and talk about like how I was, grappling with this stuff. And I really did strongly think that this was an intellectual exercise. And maybe that's why I went to Desi's, because I strongly respected his intellect. And I thought, okay, he can help me talk through and like logic through what, these different premises behind all the arguments. And I was embarrassed and angry to cry at the table, because in my mind, that had, the emotion had no place in it. Like it's irrelevant. Like it doesn't matter whether I'm angry or sad or emotion is just making it harder to reason clearly. And so to find, fear and all that stuff playing such a prominent role in my questioning, was very frustrating. And then I had to be vulnerable and cry in front of people. But Desi at that point in time showed a tremendous kindness and wisdom with how to deal with a young man. And he introduced to me the term faith crisis. I had never heard of that term before. And so I'd like for you, again, a decade plus later, to describe to the audience, what is a faith crisis? And then we'll talk about, strategies to get through it. And this is somewhat similar to the question of suffering.
Well, they're related.
Yes. But a little more abstract. And we won't spend quite as long on this because it's a little more abstract as we did with specifically suffering. But what is a faith crisis? Just give your recount.
So I'm no expert on this, but what I would say, a faith crisis is when someone who is a person of faith, someone coming from some sort of relationship with God, whatever that looks like, and they are confronted with the reality of some situation in their life that they have no answer for. They don't know how to proceed forward. And they have this internal monologue where they're asking these questions. Usually they're not saying these questions out loud. They don't know how to resolve the tension that's going on internally between their desire to continue to have faith, to trust in God, and their inability to work through whatever the scenario is that they're in, whatever their situation, their circumstance, their questions are. And so it's like they hit this roadblock spiritually. They're stuck. It's like, I don't know how to proceed from here, right? And so I can't in good conscience continue I don't want to be fake, and I've got these questions and I don't know how to answer them, and I don't know where to go from here. And then the big scary questions start showing up. The big ones begin to bubble to the surface. What if I'm wrong? What if this isn't real?
Yeah. This is all a giant
What
social
if
thing.
this is like a waste of time? What if there is no God? What if that, oh, did I just say that out loud?
Sure.
That's inappropriate. I can't be a person of faith and question the existence of God. I can't question the value of faith and yet at the same time profess to have faith. And so I wandered into this moral quagmire.
We're all laying hands on each other, praying and feeling the Spirit, and we're all acting. This is all us in some sort of giant
What is this? Or, or maybe that's what it is, or it's some other area, or, I am dealing with trauma or a crisis, or I've watched something happen, maybe not directly to me, but to someone else that I care about. And I've watched how this thing just like imploded and it turned out totally different than what I expected to happen.
And I'm stuck.
Now what? This is like a reality shattering moment for me. And that looks different for different people, but I'm now in a emotional, spiritual, and intellectual, because they overlap, crisis with my faith walk. It's a faith crisis.
So then let's talk from two perspectives. If you're the person, maybe a listener right now is the person going through a faith crisis, or you can feel it coming on. Let's talk through appropriate, healthy strategies to navigate that space. And then let's, after that, talk about if you're a person willing to help somebody with a faith crisis. Because a lot of times the pain comes not from questions you can't answer, but from watching somebody you care about flounder and struggle right next to you, and you can't save them.
Yeah.
You want to save them, and you cannot. And that causes so much pain to not be able to save somebody. And of course, am I even saving? And then now you're having a faith crisis. Right. What if I'm just indoctrinating them? Am I a cult? I don't think I'm like, and just think,
am I making this worse?
Yeah,
am I helping them?
And you just think, right, what if there is no God and they need to talk to me? And it's just like all mushroom clouding. So we'll talk from the person going through the faith crisis and the person wishing to save somebody, wanting to help.
Okay.
All right. Let's tackle.
So let's start with the person who's in a faith crisis. And I walked through this process earlier in my own life. And so when you came and spoke with Rachel and I remember our dining room table, and I remember sitting there, and as you began to just share with us, and I'm going to come back to that because that's the how to respond to the faith crisis part. But for the person going through this scenario, first off, denying it is not going to make it go away. Stuffing it is not going to make it go away. Ignoring it is not going to make it go away.
That's important.
So the first thing I would say, if you find yourself in this place, let's acknowledge it's real, because it is real. So own it in that sense and recognize I am in a place where my faith is in a crisis moment. So me denying it, me ignoring it, me pretending it's not real, me just like trying to praise my way through it or be like an extra devoted Christian of whatever flavor you are, that's not going to resolve it. In fact, it's probably going to exacerbate it and make it worse. Okay. And so I think you need to start by acknowledging that it's real. And then acknowledging that it's real. I kind of have to bounce back and forth between the two, forgive me. So on the side, if you want to help someone, and they're willing, you need to acknowledge it's real. So denying it for someone, that's not really what's happening.
Oh, the enemy's getting in your head.
The enemy's just getting here. This is just a spiritual attack, and you need to push it out. That's not going to help either. So for the person in the faith crisis, I think the first step is acknowledging that it's real. I think the next step is that at some point, you need to verbalize this. Now, for Nathan, you wrote it out. Maybe that's not your thing, and you can just express it out loud, but you need some way to verbalize it. And you need to find someone or someones, plural, that are safe to have this conversation with.
who is a safe person? Because I can hear some audiences already saying, like, I can't
Well,
go.
I don't have
A
a
safe
person.
people that I would go to are the very people that, if I'm correct about how all this is hogwash, like, it's going to come at their expense. Let's say I want to go to my pastor. Well, like, and I'm in ministry, and if I go to my pastor, like, well, one, he's biased. Of course, he's going to tell me, like, no, God's real. He's pastor. What is he going to do? Say, yeah, I know it's not real, but don't tell the congregation. Like,
Yeah.
of course, and also, like, that would, if I have to make this choice, I'm going to crush him. Or if it's my parents, or if it's my friend, like,
Yeah.
I'm going to crush them by putting this, like, one, they're biased, but even if they're not biased, like I am going to hurt the people I care about. Like, they are not safe, not because they don't love me, but because, like, I can't drop this on them and trust that what I'm getting is right, or that I'm not just going to hurt them. So how do I find my safe persons?
Okay. So let me ask you a question. And I don't know if I've asked you this before, I don't remember, but why did you choose to talk to Rachel and I? Do you even remember?
I don't fully remember. What I do remember, like I said earlier, is somewhat misguided, but in hindsight, it was perfect. Thinking that, theologically trained minister, like, this is a person, he's getting a master's degree in theological studies. If anybody knows the premises of all these arguments better than I do, it's got to be this guy. And his wife is just the best. And, like, they can help me, be the perfect yin and yang to help me, like, get through this. And we're gonna have this awesome, sick chart of, premises, and we're gonna cross them out. And that was actually real. It's more study needed. Buy this book. And we're gonna go through this exhaustive process. And he's the perfect brain to help me find it. And that's what I thought. Now, what I actually...
then the grace of God was at work. And then it's like, I'm not that guy.
I have no doubt that if God had called and that had been what was actually behind it, like, that, you could have risen to the occasion. You were wise enough to take a different path for it. And later we got to some more of the grappling through the issue. So that came. But the reason why I chose you was in my mind now, a flawed reason. But I think God was still had his hand on me, because I ended up finding the perfect person, even with my, you weren't who I thought you would be, and you were exactly who God needed, like, you to be. And then you became who I thought you were, later. Like, if that makes sense.
So I would say, thank you for sharing that. I would say, but you acknowledge that God was at work in that. And so if you are in a faith crisis, then we're starting from the premise that you had faith to begin with. It's now in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a man of faith. I don't deny that at all. And I do believe that there is a God, and that he's active and involved in the world, and that he cares for you very deeply. And so if you find yourself in a place where you're at a crisis moment, it is 100% appropriate and advisable that you have a conversation with God where you say, God, direct me to someone I can talk to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I don't even know that this is real anymore. What have you got to lose?
Sure.
Right? You started from a faith position, and if your faith is in a crisis moment and you think that your faith is wrong or that it may be going away, what do you lose by asking this God you're unsure of to direct your path to someone who can help you? Finding a safe person. It may take you having more than one conversation. So let's talk about who a safe person is. And to do that, now I got to flip hats and be on the other side. So how do I help someone who's coming in a faith crisis? I don't know if you remember this part of it, but you came to our house and you said, and forgive me if I'm being too personal, but we're using you and you started this.
Stop. I made him lament openly and bring me to tears in front of the audience. I cannot now refuse a little bit of personal myself.
So when you came to our house and you sat at our table, we talked for, it was probably 2+ hours the first time we talked, maybe even longer than that. And you just kind of, and forgive me, I don't know how else to say this. You started, and once you began and we began listening, you started asking more questions and then more questions, and you started talking faster and faster and faster. And by the end of it, you were almost hyperventilating, and you would literally just like vomited weeks worth of questions that were rattling around in your brain. And at that point, you were in tears and you looked at us. And do you remember what happened after that?
I remember how I felt afterwards. I'm not going to say the exact words for
Okay.
fear of ruining it.
Yeah.
What were the words?
But after you finished all that, we looked at you and we smiled and we said, "Thank you for sharing. These are good questions."
Mm-hmm.
And you were like gobsmacked that was my answer. That I said, "Yeah, those are good questions." Like I validated you asking the question.
Mm-hmm.
And I told you that it was important that you asked the questions.
Yeah.
And so a safe person to talk to is someone who will let you talk and ask the questions. And they're not going to rebut your questions. It's like, well, I don't even, well, first off, and then you go to the next one. Well, and the person who keeps interrupting and has an answer for all your questions is the wrong person. And so if you're out there and you're looking for someone to walk through this with you, and if you are someone who wants to help someone through something like this, you need to resist the temptation to bat down everything they're saying and to have an answer for all of that. Because a big part of this process and an important part of this process is simply the ability to be able to say these questions out loud and put it on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
I agree.
And so that first time we talked, it was just you having space where someone would listen to you and let you ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no chastisement, there was no correction, there was no rebuke, there was no, Nathan, this is all in your head. There was no, this is an attack of the enemy. It was just simply a space where Nathan could be vulnerable. And Nathan could be confused, and Nathan could be scared, and Nathan could ask big, scary questions that he had never said out loud.
Mm. One of the ways you came to describe it with me, I think we came up with this together over the course of future conversations, maybe the next 2 or 3 or 4. He put me to work. He didn't give me counseling for free. He put me to work building a fence with him.
All right, let me qualify that. It's not like I'm like, hey babe, I think I can work this, and this
it was child labor, highly illegal, very unethical.
Well, you were like 19 or 20.
Yes,
you were in college. It wasn't child labor. But what it was an opportunity for you to spend time with me. And so I was rebuilding the fence in my backyard. And first I had to clear some land, and I had all this brush. It was a pretty involved project.
I was rebuilding my faith. He was building the fence. It was perfect. So.
Yeah, it was. There's a lot of beautiful analogies in that. But what it was an opportunity for Nathan to spend time with me.
Right. Well, over the course of those conversations, and I'm just poking funny here. The term you and I came up with was standing at the edge of the void, screaming into the void. Like, are you able to like admit that the void, and by the void we meant like the scary blackness of like questions that may or may not have answers, or even worse, they do have answers and they're horrible.
And I don't like that.
And like your answers you wish
scary answers. Yeah.
But that's the void. And like what happens if you step into that space? What happens to you? What happens to your community? All the people that are caring about you want you to be doing good. Like all that is on the other edge of the void, and you can't see past that barrier. What's going to happen when you open the box? But go to the edge of the void, step into the void, and you're allowed to scream like into the void, like, and just let the questions out, and you'll be safe. And that's what we came to call it. Like over time, standing at the edge of the void, screaming into the void.
And I want to validate. If you happen to be listening to this or watching this, and you find yourself in a place where your own faith is in a crisis, it is perfectly okay for you to verbalize these questions. You need to do that. Mm-hmm. Whatever that looks like for you, at some point, you need to stand in front of that void and be able to scream into that void. And you need to find someone and ask God to lead you to that person who can stand there with you and let you do that. And part of it, for you, a big part of it to start with was just Rachel and I, and it predominantly came me that you were talking to. She was included in some of it. Someone who would just affirm to you, it's okay to have these questions and ask these questions.
And for someone who maybe hasn't gotten quite to where I got, but you can feel it coming on, it may sound trivial to say like, I don't need to be affirmed. I need answers. I would have thought that too. Like, prior to stepping up to the edge to ask, is that like, I don't save the hugs. I don't need the hugs. We're going to get to the meat here. Like, and there was space for that. But I strongly agree with what Desi is saying. Affirming the questioner is primary first, and then that creates the conditions by which the questions can be addressed. But please continue.
So I think the next part of it too is that you can't rush through this process.
Okay.
So on both sides, if you're someone who's in a faith crisis, there's no silver bullet. There's no magic pill. There's no like, if I could just find this one answer, then all this goes away. That's not real. Or if I could just do this thing, then all of a sudden I'll be through this.
Or if God would just, God, show up in my living room right now. Like,
divinely impart to me all of this knowledge that I need. It's not going to happen that way. So don't try to rush the process. And if you're someone who wants to help someone through this, don't try to fix it for them. And don't try to do this quickly. And don't try to get them through the process quickly. Because walking through a faith crisis, in my mind, is like walking through a desert. Deserts are big. And you just need to walk through it. And running through the desert and trying to blitz your way through the desert, it's not going to help you. It's probably going to destroy you. And so
imagine running in the hot sand in the desert.
It's like you're not accomplishing it. Yeah, it's not helping you. So don't try to rush through the process. And I don't know if you remember, but you had all this stuff and you looked at it. And as part of that conversation, I looked at you and I said, Nathan, these are good questions. These are big questions. We can't do this quickly. And I'm willing to walk through this with you. But let's take these one at a time. Or put it differently, let's do this one step at a time.
Yep. Oh, yeah. And it blew me away that somebody would be willing to dedicate that much time to it. And I genuinely had no idea that like the skill of responding to someone in a faith crisis was like something that other people possessed. I genuinely felt that I had an atomic bomb, and if the second I opened my mouth, I was going to destroy everything around me. And that nobody was equipped. I couldn't trust anybody. And like he was the person I thought I could trust most. But even then, it's like I felt like there's a 40% chance that I'm just nuking everything. And something I would add, I guess, to what you're saying is like learning to trust those around you. You can't keep it in and be Iron Man and figure it all out on your own. It's not going to happen. We're designed to solve problem solving
in community. Yes.
And
we were created for community.
And you have at some point in time have to use discernment and find the right person. Like he said, it might take more than one conversation, but you have to eventually trust that if the people around you genuinely love you and God's real, that like you're gonna have to just trust people, like, and you're gonna have to make that
a choice. It's a choice. You're gonna make the choice to allow someone to walk with you.
Please continue.
If you're the person trying to help someone that's in a faith crisis, you need to be willing to be candid and vulnerable, and don't make up answers. That's like the worst thing you could do. You don't need to solve this for them. I firmly believe a big part of it is just the process of asking the question and working through its ramification. So some of the questions that you had for me, we were able to talk together and you were able to find some resolution to. And some of the questions you asked me, I looked at you and I smiled and I said, yeah, that's a good question. I don't have an answer for that one. And at first, I think that frustrated you because you were like looking for the right answer. And I am saying, no, the point is asking the question and working through it. And we kind of, I don't know if you remember, we kind of ended up with shelves mentally. It's like, so we had this process like, I can put this one on this shelf and I have an answer for that. And this one I got to put on this shelf. I don't have an answer for that. And when we were done, and it took time, it was like several weeks, if not months, we had kind of sorted through the questions, but there were probably just as many on the I don't have an answer shelf as there were on the, okay, now I have a better understanding of this.
I think that came from a belief in my head that what truth is and what the truth I needed to arrive at was a certain set of propositions to say yes or no to, like a Scantron, like for the answer for question 1 is B, and it's C. I have to have my list of, how exactly does this theological position work? What is the most powerful proof for God's existence here? And then you chain them all together in this giant systematic theology, network.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if you have that, at least the core of it right, then you can begin to build from there. And that's what truth is. Truth is a web of propositions to establish and then connect in some way, and then reinforce.
This network.
Then reinforce and defend from attacks, and then figure out better ways to market it, and blah, 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 blah. That's what truth is. Truth is, I think, maybe some of that now. But I've come to believe that truth is all, like, this is going to sound super hippy-dippy, but like, hopefully you can help me like unpack it. Like, truth is not a destination just to arrive at. Truth is like a way of being.
Yes,
truth,
and it's a journey, and truth is a person.
Truth. Okay, so truth is a thing you act out. Now, it is also a set of things you can come to believe in, but truth is more than that layer of things. Truth is a much richer concept than that. Thank the Lord. Truth is a thing you act out, and in the process of finding those answers and coming closer to truth on that, the hyper intellectual side of things, you're also building up your discovery of what truth is, or who truth is, on the what I would call the more the lived side of things. And I think you need both. I don't think the answer is, well, I couldn't tell you anything about why I believe anything what I believe, but I can tell you that like I'm acting like Jesus. So I think the scripture is clear. Be able to give an answer. Like so I'm not saying to kill the intellect. I have not overcorrected. But I am saying that truth involves the heart and the mind, and it is not something that only exists in the domain of the mind. And the process of trying to find truth in the domain of the mind, how you go about it is vital, because it's shaping how the truth of the heart of the lived is being formed. That's kind of very abstract, but hopefully someone can somewhat resonate with that.
Yeah. So you've got, I don't know that I can salvage that, or that's even the right word to say salvage.
It's unsalvageable.
But I would say that denying the question, shutting down intellect is not going to help you.
Okay.
Faith, and this is a fallacy, it's not faith or reason.
Mm-hmm.
That's nonsense. God gave you the ability to reason. Okay? It's faith and reason. But when they're in tension, it's also a fallacy to believe that reason trumps faith, or that reason can find answers for everything. So just as it's wrong to say that, oh, it's only faith and I don't need any reason, well, you get into spiritual goofiness and kookiness and you're immature. And then if it's all like reason and cold logic, that's going to leave you hollowed out and very unsatisfied, and not an emotionally or spiritually healthy person either.
Not walking in truth.
Right. So I can have reason and intellect, and I can use critical thinking skills, and God has given me intelligence and the ability to work through problems and scenarios, and at the same time also have faith. And when reason can't answer the question, I can hand it off to faith. And I need to be able to have both.
From the perspective of somebody purely with reason, that sounds
ridiculous, right?
Like
yes.
pop out. Like, oh,
sure.
So anytime I don't know anything about anything, even if someone has a great argument, I just punt it to the faith category. And I can, so essentially I'm immune from I'm immune from being persuaded. Like, I cannot be reasoned with, I cannot be dialogued with. Is that a fair attack?
I think that's it's an attack, and I think it's an oversimplification, because when I say, because I'm very much for reason, okay, and I'm very much for trying to figure things out. But there were questions you and I worked through, and there were times where you weren't sure what to do with it, and I was like, that's a good question, we can't answer that. Let's put that in the I can't answer box. And that was not a satisfactory answer for you, and you needed to have the answer. And I encourage you to go hunt, and you'd look at things and look things up, and we approach things from different angles and different philosophies, and sociologically, what does this mean? And psychologically, what could this be? And so we did our best to poke at it from all these different angles. And you had no satisfactory answer no matter how you looked at it. So when you just made that claim, I'm not saying, oh, I don't know how to answer this question, so it's faith, and I just quit trying to find an answer.
There you go.
I'm saying, no, let's walk around this. You walk around it as many times as you want. Look at it from every angle you can think of. But there are questions in life. I don't care if you're looking at it sociologically, if you're looking at it from systems theory, if you're looking at it from a counseling perspective, if it's psychologically, if you're fill in the blank, whatever kind of intellectual framework that you want to create, you're not going to be able to answer the question.
I see. No, that makes sense. The flaw, the trap of reason would be the built-in.
There's always an answer.
Subtle assumption that an answer could be found, like that.
And so the reality is, there's not always an answer.
That makes
but
sense.
You still gain by asking the question, and I still learn and grow by trying to answer the question, even if the question can't be solved.
The walking in truth can be growing, even if the set of preposition chart isn't getting
Bigger.
Exponentially.
Yeah. I'm not filling in the grid anymore, but I'm still learning to walk.
Love this. Okay, so there's a few questions left, and then let's land the plane here. This has been a wonderful conversation. I appreciate it.
One of the things, let me say this too. So with the faith crisis thing, and let's say I can answer the questions. One of the things I kept saying to you is, all right, so what's the alternative?
Yeah.
I kept trying to get you to look at it from different angles. So if it's not this, let's say your faith is wrong. What's the alternative? And so sometimes you'd throw something at, well, what if it was this? And say, all right, let's walk down that road. Mm-hmm. And we would do like a mental role-playing exercise and so what's the conclusion of this path? And you'd get far down that path and you realize, I don't like that either. I was like, okay, so not that one. All right, let's try another one. You're like, well, what if it's this? I'm like, okay, well, let's walk down this path and see where this goes. And so don't be afraid of doing this mental exercise. And I would let you challenge me. And you would ask questions and I'd give an answer and you wouldn't be happy. And I'd smile and I wouldn't get defensive. I would say, okay, so let's say I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. Demonstrate to me that I'm wrong. So what is the alternative that's better than my answer? And I allow you to continually come back and challenge me, and as you work your way through that. And the other thing, and this is important if you're helping someone, and I said this to you multiple times, I kept saying, Nathan, all I want you to do is keep talking to me. Even if you don't like my answers, keep talking to me. Don't get stuck in your head. The challenge with a faith crisis, especially for those who are very intellectually bent and cerebral bent, it's so easy to get lost in your own head and you just walk around in circles. And I said that to you several times. I'm like, Nathan, we're just going in circles. But keep talking to me.
Yeah.
Shutting it down and having dialogue with yourself in your head is not going to fix it.
Over the years, I've come up with an analogy. What have you ever seen what happens when you point two mirrors at each other? Like the infinite hallway kind of effect. I've kind of likened that to like getting stuck in your own head. Like it feels so deep and it goes forever. It's so deep, but you're really actually going nowhere.
You're not. Yeah, exactly. I know you're exactly right. And I said that to you. I was like, Nathan, this isn't productive.
Not to say that reflection isn't important.
No, reflection is very important.
My whole shtick about everything we're doing is about reflection.
But the internal monologue with only myself.
Yes. Reflection within community is just as important, if not more important, than internal reflection. And of course, you need both. But he's absolutely right. The trap of the intellect can keep you stuck only in internal reflection with no pathway out. But you should keep the dialogue going. This is going to lead me to our last question, and I think we should land the plane. I think a lot of good came through my times of faith crisis, actually. In hindsight, like it was incredibly beneficial for me. It strengthened our community, obviously. And there was a lot of things I was able to learn that enabled me to make the church better later. Whenever I was in positions of authority and I was over people.
Or leadership.
Leadership. That's what I meant. Like when I was in a position of leadership later, I was able to see things way before others saw them, and I understood, and I knew how to minister in just much more targeted, effective ways. Not that I'm pumping myself up, but just having experienced and thought deeply through certain things, I was able to provide a lot of help to others who were trying to follow me as I was trying to follow you, as we all try to follow Christ.
Right.
And so I know that positives can come from it, but I often find that there's not a lot of Desi Lugos obviously out there. Now,
I don't know that.
Well,
but
I think a lot of people, one, there's more Desi Lugos out there. And by Desi Lugos, I mean people who do willing to listen. There's more out there than you think. But there's also, full stop, there are more people who will listen out there
more people who will listen
than you think. Now, to those of us who are not in faith crisis, more of us need to be those same
willing
people.
to listen.
Don't
try to answer it for him. The mistake would have been for me to try and answer Nathan's questions. This is about guiding Nathan towards finding answers.
Well, and so the question, let's end this with a question from the perspective of somebody who is not in a faith crisis.
Yeah.
Why do we not take the concerns of people who are hurt, disgruntled, and faith crisis? The people on the fringes or on their way out for whatever reason.
Sure.
Usually these things are together. I'm hurt and have a faith crisis.
Suffering, pain, disappointment, all that often leads to these types of things.
So why do we not take the concerns of those of us who are struggling on the fringes on the way out? Maybe they want to be in, maybe they want to be out, but it's clear that they are weighed down with emotional and mental cares. And a lot of times, like, I've found that you see things very unclearly in some ways when you're in that state. And in other ways, you never see more clearly than when you're in that state. You strip away a lot of what's real and a lot of what is beautiful and what God wants for you. And that's the tragedy of a faith crisis. Yeah. But the positive is you strip away a lot of what is not real. And that's things that I believe the church...
facade. You start tearing down facade.
Things that the church needs to take accountability for. Things that the church needs to re-examine. Things that maybe have gone on just because we do it because we do it. And we don't really... Yeah. There's a lot that does need to be reformed that you can also see in that state. Now, of course, communicating that is difficult because when you're in a state of pain or confusion, it's hard to communicate something the church should actually be listening to.
Yeah, in a respectful way.
It's hard to do that. But for us, for those of us in leadership, I want to ask you, why do we not take the concerns of those people who are on the fringes more seriously? Their feedback is in some ways more valuable than anybody else's feedback, or it's unique feedback that you cannot get. The person who is sold out, praying hard to God at the altar is going to give you some wonderful feedback that you need to hear. But that feedback is going to be
the same.
It's not the same thing as a person who says, actually, I came to your church and I'm not coming back.
Yeah.
That person probably has some things that are look, he's a jaded person. And there's probably a lot of bones to spit out. They eat the meat, spit out the bones. But to say that there's no meat there, there's nothing that person needs to tell us that we should be listening to. There's no accountability to be taken anywhere amongst our leadership. That person is just hurt because they decided to make up a story. That, when you say it out loud, that obviously doesn't seem wise or right. I don't think there's enough of us that are active enough at reaching for the people who are in pain and crisis, trying to get their voice into our circles. Yes, they're not going to say everything perfectly, and they're going to have a bunch of stuff in their head that's wrong. But we can filter through some of that and walk with them through it to help them figure that out. Why do we not reach for them more? Wouldn't their voice be one of the voices we should want most in the circles? What are your thoughts on that?
We asked a why question, and that's a good question, Nathan. But that goes on I don't know that I can answer that. So I can't presume to answer for other people why they are or are not engaging in particular things.
To be clear, I guess I'm issuing a question and also, to be fair, a challenge.
You're really issuing a challenge.
I feel there were a lot of things I had no business talking to because I was 19-year-old, 20-year-old who didn't know what I was talking about. And there were some things I was able to see very clearly.
Some of your observations were valid. And if you remember some of that, I'd say
And I was blessed to find a leader who would integrate that and would dialogue and was willing, I might be wrong, and was willing to have my voice for months and months and months at the table of his mind.
Yeah.
But most, I can say most, I would suspect a lot of other Nathans are out there and didn't find their Desi. And I want to create a space where those people can find each other.
Yeah.
But I want all of us to I guess I'm issuing a question and a challenge, and I guess I more just want you to respond to that.
Okay.
If that's
So
okay.
your challenge, I think, is valid. This takes time, and you have to be able to filter when people are in pain, what they're saying and how they're saying it and how it's being colored. And you need godly wisdom, and you need to be led of the Spirit, and you need to know when to speak and when to not speak and just listen. And that's hard. What you let me do with you is hard work. And I told you at the time, you're not the only person I had done that with. And you weren't the first, and you weren't the last. There were people before you, and there have been people after
You're
you.
saying I'm not special? Okay.
But at the same time, now listen, and now that you say that, and I know you're joking, but this, you are uniquely Nathan, but faith crisis
Is not unique to Nathan.
is not unique to Nathan. And that's part of what we're doing. And we're validating, like, this is a real thing, right? And part of my service in God's kingdom, part of my ministry, as the Lord has allowed it, is to walk with people such as yourself. Sometimes it's a young man. There's been times where it's young ladies too, or I say young, usually it's a young adult who's willing to do this, but it could be an older person. And I've been privileged to, and I see it as a privilege, to walk through these valleys with multiple people. I walked through this valley. I really wandered and blundered my way through that valley, and I didn't get the kind of help that I was able to offer you. And God was so gracious to me. And I found, to stick with the desert analogy, some oasis here or there where I was able to be refreshed and ask a lot of questions. And it took a lot longer, and I eventually made it through the other side. And I thought, I don't want anybody else to have to walk through that desert the same way that I walked through that desert.
That sucked.
That was horrible. Like, we need some guideposts, you know, and everybody's guideposts aren't the same, but the community of faith is richer. It is deeper. It is stronger when the community of faith includes people who have walked through deserts and come out the other side, versus people who wander into a desert and we say, I don't know what to do with that. Good luck. Go love Jesus somewhere else.
Sure.
If you still love Jesus. And I can't save anyone, and I don't rescue anyone, and I want to make this clear, and I don't think you're doing this, but I am not on a pedestal, and I am in no way unique, and there are other people who do this.
Yeah.
I just happen to be the person who walked through this desert with you.
Yeah.
But there are other people who do these kind of things, and it needs to happen. Community of faith needs to have space for these kind of questions. I've told you several times, you're not scaring God with your questions.
Yeah.
And sometimes in a community of faith, it's like we feel this need to defend God. And I don't know if you remember, I had conversations with you. It was like, I don't have to defend God.
He can defend himself.
It was like, he doesn't need my help. I'd bungle it anyways. I wouldn't really be helping God. I'd just be getting defensive for my structure that I built around how I think this needs to happen. Healthy faith communities have space for questions. And they have space for unanswered questions.
Bam. I think that is a perfect place to leave it. Part of what I hope these dialogues and this platform can be is a place like that in itself, and a place that helps empower others to create places like this. And I think it's beautiful what you said. Thank you for talking through suffering, through lament, through faith crises, and through the wisdom, and also for sharing personal stories. This has been a wonderful dialogue. It's definitely made my understanding of the topic a lot richer, and I hope it's blessed the audience as well. And
I hope so.
I hope you have a wonderful time, and God bless. See you next time.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us. If you found this content valuable, please consider supporting us for free by subscribing, sharing, and engaging with us on whatever platform you're most comfortable with. And if you'd like to support us financially, you'll receive premium and early access content. Lastly, please check out all the cool things we're working on by going to reflectiveecclesia.com. Thanks.